Okay, so welcome back, everybody, to Sefer Shmuel, Shmuel Aleph, to be exact. Anybody remember where we left off? No, nobody's got any idea. Well, neither did I.
Chapter 15.
Chapter 15 is correct, but I also didn't remember because it's been 5 weeks since we had a Shmuel Aleph Shir, what with Shavuot being on a Sunday, and then all the other excitements that we've had in between, and then I wasn't very well. And so now it's 5 weeks later, and I don't really expect anybody to remember. I had to go and listen to the last few minutes of the previous Shir online to find out where we were holding. And where we were holding, actually, it's very interesting. We left it on a cliffhanger, although you all know the story. I'm going to put the text on the screen now, chapter 15, and we'll see where we're going. Let's have a look. Hopefully you can see the screen now. Can you see the text on the screen yet?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what we said previous weeks was that we know that there was a mitzvah in the Torah to destroy Amalek. We mention it every year in Parshat Zachor. It is a positive commandment. That's why we read Parshat Zachor on the Shabbat before Purim. And it took 450 years from the time of entering the land until an opportunity arose for the king of Israel, King Shaul, to fulfill this commandment. The commandment was, when you enter the land, you must utterly destroy Amalek. And it took 450 years until that opportunity arose. And now the opportunity has arisen, and Shmuel gives the commandment to Shaul at the beginning of this chapter to fulfill this commandment. Let me just see if I know. I'm just going to stop the share for a minute so that I can mute you all, because there's a bit of background noise. There we go. I've muted you now. Leon, you'll need to unmute in a sec, please. I'll put the text back on the screen now. So we stopped at verse 9, but I'm just for background going to ask Leon to read from the top of the chapter.
Samuel said to Saul, Hashem sent me to anoint you as king over his people, over Israel. So now hear the sound of Hashem's words. So said Hashem, master of legions, I have remembered what Amalek did to Israel, the ambush. He emplaced against him on the way, so he went up from Egypt. Now go and strike down Amalek and destroy everything he has. Have no pity on him. Kill man and woman alike, infant and suckling alike, ox and sheep alike, camel and donkey alike. Saul had all the people summoned, and he counted them through lambs, 200,000 infantrymen, and the men of Judah were 10,000. Saul came to the city of Amalek, and he fought them in the valley. Saul said to the Kenite, go, withdraw, descend from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For you acted kindly to all the children of Israel when they went up from Egypt. So the Kenite withdrew from among Amalek. Saul struck down Amalek from Havilah to the approach to Shur, which is alongside Egypt. He captured Agag, king of Amalek, alive, and the entire people he destroyed by the edge of the sword. Saul, as well as the people, took pity on Agag, on the best of the sheep, the cattle, the fatted bulls, the fatted sheep, and all that was good. And they were not willing to destroy them, but the inferior and wretched livestock, that they did destroy.
Okay, let's stop there. So that's our story. Last time we spoke about who these Canaanites were. If you remember, they were the descendants of Yitro, and Yitro had been kind to the Bnei Israel, so they were given an opportunity to run away. But it's very clear that the instruction to Shaul was to kill everybody and not to let anybody live. Verse 3 says it clearly, now go, you shall smite Amalek, you shall utterly destroy all that is his. And then there's this word here. I'm in Pasuk Gimel here, verse 3. Velo tachmol alav. Translated here, and you shall not have pity on him, or on it, I suppose we would say, because we're referring to Amalek. How do you have that translated, Leon, in verse 3?
Have no pity on him.
On him. Okay, so it's talking about Amalek in this pasuk. It's translated here as him because we know what happens, don't we? In verse 9, is that the him he's referring to ultimately is Agag. So he's told to have no pity on him. Lo tachmol alav. Now let's just go to verse 9, which is where we left it last time.
Steinzel says it, Johnny, by the way.
Steinzel says it. Okay.
Yes, do not have pity on it.
Okay, I think that's the meaning. I think the meaning there is it. I think the meaning is that it's referring to Amalek, but I think it's translated both in Chabad and Art Scroll as him because of what comes later. And what comes later is verse 9. And where we ended last time was that somebody, and I think it was Jeffrey, said, or it might have been Leon, I can't remember now, said that, but ultimately Saul had pity on Agag, and he was a humanist kind of thing, because if you look at verse 9. Could you read verse 9 again for us, Leon?
Saul, as well as the people, took pity on Agag.
Okay,
on the best
there.
of the people.
Stop there. Vayachamol Shaul v'ha'am al Agag. And Shaul and the people took pity on Agag. From the same word, vayachamol. Go back to verse 3 and you'll see that Shmuel said to Shaul, Velo tachmol alav. He's used the exact same word. He said, don't have pity on him. So verse 9 is very, very clearly a transgression of the commandment of Samuel to Shaul in verse 3, because it uses the same word. Shaul says, do not have pity. Shmuel says, do not have pity. And we're told that Shaul and the people did have pity. Now, we need to drill down into this word, vayachamol. Where have we had that word before, where we can get some indication of what's going on from? Any ideas of where we might have had that word before? Okay, so let's have a look. Where am I going now? Yes, I am going now to Shmuel Bet, chapter 12. And I'm going to show you that the word vayachamol does not indicate pity in the same way as we would understand the expression to take pity on somebody. In other words, when we say to take pity on somebody, we mean we feel sorry for them, and we're trying to be nice to them, and we're expressing a positive, character trait. And I'm going to show you that this
Use the word rachmonot for pity.
Yes, it's the same. Well, it could be the same root. It could be the same root. We're missing out the resh there, and the root of rachamim is rechem, the womb, and we haven't got the resh here, so I'm not sure about that, but it's certainly similar. But the implication is from the verb vayachamol, and we understand it, don't we, to mean a positive feeling of kindness towards somebody. As you say, you have rachmanos on them. You feel sorry for them. But have a look at this in Shmuel Bet, chapter 12. I suppose really we need to look at chapter 11 to know what's going on, but we haven't really got time to go into chapter 11 in detail, because we're going to do chapter 11 of Shmuel Bet in great detail when it comes around, because chapter 11 of Shmuel Bet is the story of David and Batsheva. Okay, you all know the story. Those of you who were at the Tikkun Leil Shavuot will have heard the whole shiur on David and Batsheva. Basically, we know the story. David saw Batsheva, took her, committed adultery with her, and engineered for her husband to be killed in so doing. And it was a dreadful episode in the life of David Amalek. And we're not going to go into the rights and wrongs of it. Well, there aren't any rights, but we aren't going to go into the wrongs of it now. We will do when we get to chapter 12 of Shmuel Bet in a few months' time, hopefully. But chapter 12, where I want to show you now, is the response to the story of David and Batsheva. And it is God's response via the prophet Natan, who was the successor to Shmuel. After Shmuel, the prophet was Natan. So let's have a look what Natan says. From the top of chapter 12, Leon, please.
Hashem sent Natan to David. He came to him and told him, there were two men in one city, one rich and one poor. The rich man had very many sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one small ewe that he had acquired. He raised it, and it grew up together with him and his children. It ate from his bread and drank from his cup and lay in his bosom. It became like a daughter to him. A wayfarer came to the rich man. He was reluctant to take from his own sheep or cattle to prepare for the visitor who had come to him. So he took the poor man's ewe and prepared it for the man who had come to him. David was very indignant about this man. And he said to Nathan, as Hashem lives, any man who does this deserves to die. And he must pay fourfold for the ewe, because he did this deed and because he had no pity. Nathan said to David, you are that man. Thus said Hashem, God of Israel, I anointed you as king over Israel, and I saved you from Saul's hand.
Okay, let's stop there. So this is the response to David's episode with Batsheva. Natan gives a mashal, he gives us a parable of a rich man and a poor man. The rich man doesn't want to use his own money, doesn't want to use his own flock to give this guest a meal. So he appropriates the one and only little ewe of the poor man, and he slaughters it and gives it to the wayfarer as a meal. Clearly, what Natan is telling him is that David could have had any number of wives legitimately, and instead he took the wife of Uriah Hittite. He took Batsheva, who was somebody else's wife. and therefore he deserved to die. But the reason I've brought this is to show you that there are two meanings to the word vayachamol. And the first one, well, let's look at the second one first. Here, in verse 6, you'll see, Vetakivsa yeshalem arbatayim, and for the ewe he needs to pay fourfold. Ekev asher asata davar hazeh, he did this bad thing. Va'al asher lo chamal, he had no pity. He had no pity. There, the expression chamal fits in with our translation in chapter 15 of Shmuel Aleph that we're learning, that Shaul and the people had pity on Agag. They spared him. And here it says he had no pity because he didn't spare the poor man. However, I want to show you that there is another use of this verb, vayachamol. And here it is in verse 4. Vayavo heilech leish ha'ashir. A wayfarer came to the rich man. Vayachamol lakachat mitzono umibkaro lasot la'oreach hibalo. And you translated that, Leon, as he was reluctant to take from his own sheep. In other words, there was self-interest here. Vayachamol lakachat mitzono. And here it's translated, he spared to take of his own flock, which doesn't make sense in English to me. He spared to take of his own flock is it's a very cumbersome translation. The reason they've used that is because of this verb, vayachamol. And this translation, the Chabad translation, has tried to be faithful to the usual meaning of the word vayachamol, which is to have pity. In other words, what he's saying is he had pity on his own flock. Well, that doesn't make sense. He didn't have pity on his own flock. The Art Scroll translation is much better. He was reluctant to take his own flock. He didn't want to use his own money. Why should I use my own money when I can nick somebody else's and keep my own? Because he was a bad man. So this word vayachamol here does not indicate a good character trait. On the contrary, it indicates a very bad and selfish character trait. Vayachamol lakachat mitzono. He was reluctant to take from his own sheep, and therefore he took the sheep of the others. And what does Steinsaltz say, Johnny?
Loath. He was loath.
He was loath. Again, a better translation than the Chabad. He was loath to take. In other words, he didn't want to do it. Nothing to do with pity whatsoever. So the reason I brought that is to show you that the verb vayachamol does not necessarily mean that he had pity on Agag. And if you look carefully, let's go back to our chapter here. Why did, and now, okay, so we're now thinking that this word vayachamol Shaul v'ha'amal Agag is indicating that there was a selfish element to this act. Because in the same way as our rich man was selfish about not using his own sheep to feed the wayfarer, it was all about self-interest. He wanted to use somebody else's money to get his own self-interest. The suggestion here is that this verb vayachamol has the same implication, and that Shaul and the people spared Agag and the sheep and the cattle out of personal self-interest. Now, what's interesting here is that look at the structure of the verse 9. Vayachamol Shaul v'ha'am al Agag v'al meitav hatzon v'habakar. Saul and the people had pity on Agag and on the best of the sheep and the cattle. It's lumped together. Agag and the sheep are lumped together, and Saul and the people are lumped together. So reading that verse just on its own, you would think that both Shaul and the people had pity or spared both Agag and the cattle. In other words, both Saul and the people were involved with Agag, and both Saul and the people were involved with the sheep. That's how it reads, doesn't it? Because they're lumped together. The two subjects are Shaul and the people, and the two objects are Agag and the sheep. But if you look a bit later, you will see that that's not necessarily the case. Have a look and well, let's read on. Let's read on to as far as, and including verse 15. Let's go from verse 10 to verse 15, Leon.
The word of Hashem then came to Samuel, saying, I have reconsidered my having made Saul king, for he has turned away from me and has not fulfilled my word. Samuel was aggrieved by this, and he cried out to Hashem the entire night. Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul. It had been told to Samuel, saying, Saul came to the Carmel and set him up for himself a place for an altar. He turned and descended to Gilgal. When Samuel came to Saul, Saul said to him, Blessed are you to Hashem. I have fulfilled the word of Hashem. And Samuel said, And what is this sound of the sheep in my ears and the sound of the cattle that I hear? Saul said, I have brought them from the Amalekite, for the people took pity on the best of the sheep and cattle in order to bring them as offerings to Hashem, your God. But we have destroyed the remainder.
Okay, now, what's Bo? Anita and Michael have finally made it. They were having trouble connecting. There they go. Let's just admit them. Right. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to ask Johnny, please, to read out the translation of verse 15 from the Steinsaltz.
Saul said, Saul said, they brought them from the Amalekites, as the people spared the best of the flocks and the cattle, in order to present offerings to the Lord your God.
Okay, that's fine. Now, Johnny has read out the Steinsaltz, and it's pretty similar to the Chabad. And Saul said they brought them from the Amalekites. Now, I noticed something, that Leon said something different. Leon did not say that. Leon translated from the Art Scroll as follows. Do it again, Leon.
Verse 15.
Yeah.
Saul said, I have brought them from the Amalekite.
Okay. He said, I have brought them from the Amalekites. And both Rav Steinsaltz and the Chabad translation is, they brought them from the Amalekites. Now, let's have a look which is accurate. Let's have a look in the Hebrew. Vayomer Shaul, and Shaul said, Me Amaleki hevi They brought them. They were brought. It's actually heavy I think, is actually a passive verb, and they were brought. Asher chamal ha'am al meitav hatzon. That the people had pity on the best of the sheep. Okay, now ignore for the moment the incorrect translation of the Art Scroll. What is Shaul saying here in this verse? If you have the translation as we've got it on the screen and as Johnny read it out, what is Shaul saying?
So if they would have brought them out to have pity on them, why would they kill them as offerings?
Okay, that's a good question. We'll come to that in a minute, but let's just go down this question. Who had pity on the best of the sheep, according to this verse?
The people.
Soldiers.
The people. So what is Shaul saying here? Shaul is saying that it wasn't me, Gov. He's trying to shift the blame, isn't he? He's saying the people had pity on the best of the sheep and the oxen. And that's why it's important that the translation that Leon read out, we know that that is not correct, because it doesn't say I brought them from the Amalekites, because he's shifting the blame here to the people. The people had pity on the best of the sheep. And it says, actually says, they were brought from the Amalek, which the people had pity on. So the subject here of the ones doing the pity, according to verse 15, is not Shaul, it's the people. The people had pity on the best of the sheep. And the reason that they did so, according to Shaul, was in order to sacrifice to Hashem, your God. But we will see later on that that actually isn't the case, and that the idea was actually that they should keep the spoil for themselves. So this was an act which could be seen as self-serving. This was not humanistic. This was not sparing the sheep and the cattle because they didn't want to kill them. Because as Johnny has just said, if they were having pity on them, they were going to kill them anyway for their sacrifices to Hashem. Or if you're more cynical about it, they were going to kill them anyway for themselves. It wasn't that they fancied they wanted to keep the animals alive. This was self-interest, and that's the meaning of this verb vayachamol Shaul in verse 9. That Shaul and the people had pity. No, they didn't have pity on Agag. They were reluctant, in the words of the translation of the Art Scroll in chapter 12 of Shmuel Bet, or they were loath, as Steinsaltz says there. They were loath to do the job properly. They didn't want to do it. Why? Because of self-interest. Now, Shaul has tried to blame the people. The people have said, Shaul has said, the people had pity on the best of the sheep. But the verse 9 tells us that Shaul was involved as well. Shaul and the people had pity on Agag and on the best of the sheep and the cattle. Let me ask you this question. What interest did the people have in sparing the sheep and the cattle? Well, we've just said, haven't we? Either it was to sacrifice to Hashem, so they didn't need to use their own stuff, a bit like the story of that Nathan told David, or they want to keep it for themselves. What interest is there? What interest possibly could there be for the people to spare Agag? What self-interest could there be for the people to spare Agag?
Absolutely none.
Absolutely none. Correct. So in whose self-interest is it to spare Agag? Well, in order to understand that, we have to go back to understand how things worked back in the day when this was going on.
Can I tell you what Rob Steinsaltz says on that little piece?
Yes, go ahead.
It said it's unclear what unique quality of Agag caused Saul's men to spare him. Perhaps they were impressed by his fighting in battle.
I think that's unlikely.
Yeah.
If they were impressed by his fighting in battle, they'd have definitely wanted to do him in.
Yeah.
So let's have a look in Shoftim, chapter 1. I'm taking you all the way back. You'll remember this when we see it. There it is on the screen. This was a chap called Adoni Bezek. Okay, and this was a fight of against the Canaanites, and Adoni Bezek was the leader of the Canaanites. And what did they do to him? Verse 6, I've highlighted it on the screen.
Adoni Bezek fled, and they chased after him. They seized him and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to glean under my table, as I did. So God requited me. They brought him to Jerusalem and he died there.
Okay, remember this story of thumbs getting cut off? What happened was that back in the day, when you won a battle, you maimed the leaders and you humiliated them. And by humiliating the leaders of your enemy, you do two things. First of all, you subjugate the enemy's people because they see that their leader has been humiliated. And secondly, you elevate yourself. By humiliating your opponent, you make yourself bigger. My wife has a very famous saying. She says it, quotes it very often. A person who wants to be greater than anybody else has two choices. He can either grow himself or he can cut the legs off everybody else so that he's bigger than them. And that happens, unfortunately. And this is what this was all about. But look what Adoni-Bezek says himself. He admits 70 kings. I subdued 70 kings and I cut their thumbs and toes off. And they gleaned food under my table. In other words, they were schnorrers. These were kings. And I made them into schnorrers by cutting off their toes and their thumbs. And I humiliated them. He didn't kill them. He humiliated them. That's what you did to the leader of your enemy. You humiliated him. Where do we see that elsewhere in Shoftim? Happened to one of our leaders who was captured and humiliated before he was killed. Yes, Jeffrey?
And they hold their heads up.
Yes, Jeffrey.
Shimshon.
Shimshon, that's right. Shimshon was captured. He wasn't killed. Eventually, when they captured him, after he had been he'd been betrayed by his wife, he was humiliated, wasn't he? He had his eyes poked out, and he was made to be chained. He was chained to the millstone, and he was made to walk round grinding the millstone like a donkey, like a blind donkey. So this is another example of what you do to the leader of your enemy. Yes, Anita?
The thing is, all the Amalekites were destroyed. He destroyed them all apart from Agag. So it's not that he could humiliate him in front of his own people.
Okay, good point. Good point. But it still has the second point. What he has done is making himself look big in front of his own people because he's parading Agag. Okay? He's parading Agag, who's being humiliated, the great mighty warrior Agag, as Steinsaltz points out. Maybe he was a great warrior, such a great warrior. Look what I've done to him. I've humiliated him. And he paraded him in front of the people for his own self-aggrandizement. How do we know? Let's go back to our chapter. How do we know that Shaul was interested in his own self-aggrandizement? Because we will see over here what we see over here, where is it now? Later on, can't just put my finger on it just now, but later on we will see that Shaul makes a monument. Here we go. Yeah, I found it. Verse 12. Verse 12. Verse 12, Leon.
Samuel arose early in the morning to meet Saul. It had been told to Samuel, saying, Saul came to the Carmel and set up for himself a place for an altar. He turned and descended to Gilgal. When Samuel
Okay,
came,
let's just stop there. So what's going on in verse 12? Okay, Shaul came to the Carmel. V'hinei matziv lo yad. Matziv lo yad. Matziv is from the word matzeva. He set up a matzeva. He set up a, what is a matzeva? It's a monument, yeah? It's a monument. When we have a matzeva as a tombstone, it's a monument to the person who lies there, isn't it? That's what a matzeva is. So he set up yad. What is yad? Okay, I knew somebody would say hand because that's the obvious answer. But clearly that's not the answer that I was asking for because it's too obvious. Okay, where else do you know that word yad where it does not mean hand? And I guarantee you've all heard of it. Probably guarantee that you've all been there. Yes, Anita, redeem yourself. Redeem
Yad
yourself,
Vashem.
Anita.
Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem. What does Yad Vashem? What is Yad Vashem?
It's the memorial to the people who died in the Holocaust.
It is. And what does the words Yad Vashem mean?
I would have said, oh.
You would have said hand and name, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Well, what does that mean?
Oh, a memorial to the name. A memory.
Yeah, Yad is another word for memorial or for a monument. There's a place called Yad Mordechai. Anybody been to Yad Mordechai?
Yes.
It doesn't mean Mordechai's hand. It means a memorial to Mordechai. Does anybody know who that Mordechai is?
I don't remember.
To who they are memorizing at Yad Mordechai?
independence.
Yes, Jeffrey.
It was the leader of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising.
He was.
Mordechai Anilovich.
He was. Anilevitz. Mordechai Anilevitz. Correct, Jeffrey. Well done. He was the leader of the Warsaw Uprising. And there is a monument to him, Yad Mordechai. Yad means a monument. We read about it. Again, also, there's a Haftorah that we read it in as well. And I can't remember exactly now where it is. Have we got David Marks with us? Yes. David, can you help me out here? There's a Haftorah that we read. It might be on, is it on a fast day? Is it the Haftorah for the fast day in the afternoon where we read about Yad Vashem?
Yad Vashem, yeah, it is.
Yes.
Yeshayahu 55.
Thank you very much. I knew you'd know.
But
Yes.
you've got an even better example, which is connected to Amalek. The last pasuk of Parashat Shalach.
Case for Yad Yah. Yes. The reading of Purim, correct, at the end of Bashalach. So the word Yad means a monument as well as a hand. I don't know what the connection is. Can anybody think of a connection between monument and hand? Other than the obvious thing that a hand makes a monument, can't be that, it's too obvious. Anyway, there's a bit of homework for somebody. Find the connection between hand and monument. But here, it means a monument. So why am I telling you all this? Because here we see over here that Shaul has made himself a monument. He's trying to make a name for himself. So we can see that this is even after he's been told, oh no, he hasn't yet been told. No, it's not true. He hasn't yet been told. He is making himself a monument to show everybody his victory against Amalek. So there is definitely precedent here that Shaul wants to make glory for himself out of this victory against Amalek. And that is why he spared Agag. Not that he had pity on him. He wasn't a humanist. We know he wasn't a humanist. You can look through the rest of the book of Shmuel where we're talking about Shaul. We'll come to it maybe even now. Maybe I'll show it you now. Yes, I'll show it you now. Chapter 22 of Shmuel Aleph is the story of the city of Nov. Anybody know the story of the city of Nov? was a city of priests. We will get to it in not too many weeks. It's only in chapter 22, only 7 chapters ahead of where we are now. David Amalek was running away from Shaul. Shaul wanted to kill David before David was the king, of course. David was the rival. David was given food and shelter by the priests in the city of Nov. Shaul found out about it, and what did he do? He destroyed the entire city of Nov, right? Because they gave bread and refuge to his enemy. Have a look at this chapter. Leon, if you would read out, let's have a look. Where should we go from? Verse 17.
The king then said to the footmen who stood about him, surround and kill the Kohanim of Hashem, because their hand is also with David, and because they knew that he was fleeing and did not inform me. But the servants of the king were not willing to send forth their hand to slay the Kohanim of Hashem. So the king said to Doeg, you circle around and slay the Kohanim. Doeg the Edomite circled around and he killed the Kohanim. On that day he killed 85 men, wearers of linen robes. And Nov, the city of Kohanim, he killed by the blade of the sword, man and woman alike, child and suckling alike, ox, donkey, and sheep.
So, hang on, that will stop there. So, you can see from here that Shaul is not a humanist. He's not somebody who is having pity, Nebuch, on poor Agag and on these poor sheep, Nebuch, the Shepselech, who are going to get slaughtered. Because when it comes to Nov and it comes to his own enemy and his own self-interest, he's not only is he not having pity on them, when the people refuse to carry out his orders, he turns to somebody else to do it. And look at the language in verse 19. Does that remind you of anything? Read verse 19 again for us, Leon, please.
And Nov, the city of Kohanim, he killed by the blade of the sword, man and woman alike, child and suckling alike, ox, donkey, and sheep.
Okay, let's have a look at our chapter. What did Shaul say to what did Shmuel say to Shaul? Verse 3, please.
Now go and strike down Amalek and destroy everything he has. Have no pity on him. Kill man and woman alike, infant and suckling alike, ox and sheep alike, camel and donkey alike.
Exactly the same language. So Shaul was willing to do it when it was his own self-interest against David, but when he was told to do it by Shmuel in the fulfillment of the Mitzvah of the Torah, he wasn't willing to do it. So the language in chapter 22 that I've just showed you, being exactly the same as the language here, is for a reason. And it's to show us, don't go thinking that this word in verse 9, Vayachamol Shaul v'ha'am al Agag, don't go thinking that this word means what it says on the page here, and he had pity on Agag. This was not a man who had pity. This was a man who was interested in his own self-aggrandizement. By making a monument to himself in verse 12, he wanted to keep Agag alive, to humiliate him, to parade him in front of his own people, not Agag's people, because as Anita has mentioned, they were dead, but in front of the Bnei Yisrael, to boost his own position. Now, why would he want to do that? Why would Shaul feel the need to make himself a monument and to make himself into a ganzer knacker by parading Agag in front of the people. What kind of person does that? We all know them, don't we, Jeffrey?
Big head.
Yeah, people who are
Yeah.
actually in need of personal praise. People who have low self-esteem and need to get the praise of others all the time. People who are self-confident. People who know their own worth. People who are of substance. They don't need to make monuments to themselves. It's for others to make monuments to them, not for them to make monuments for themselves. They don't need to parade their enemies in front of their people to show what a big shot they are, because those people who have self-confidence, those people who know their own worth, don't need that. The people who do those kind of things are the people who have low self-esteem, who actually are not really up to the job, whatever the job is that they're doing, and they need to big themselves up. And we have seen this many, many times, I'm sure, in our lives. The people, the biggest egoists that you will find are usually the people who don't have their own self-confidence. They need to have that constant reassurance that they're wonderful and that and that they are the king. And there was no need for Shaul to do any of that, because he was the king anointed by God. But we know from Shaul's past, don't we, that he lacks confidence. What did he say when Shmuel approached him in the first place at God's behest and said, "You're going to be the king"? What did he say? He said, "Me?
To do it.
I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest tribe. And I'm not even from one of the Macha families of Benjamin. I'm just a nobody." And then when he came to be crowned, what happened? He ran away. He was to be found hiding amongst the baggage, remember? He had to be schlepped out. And then later on, he didn't have the confidence to go against the people. The people said, "We need to go out and fight," and that's what they did. He didn't have the confidence in his own position. And this is Shaul's downfall. This is his nemesis. On the one hand, he demonstrates excessive humility. He doesn't believe in himself, and that manifests itself in looking for constant praise. And you'll see very soon when Shmuel says to him, "God has taken away the crown from your family," the last thing that Shaul asks him is that Shmuel should honor him, because he can't bear to have that honor taken away from him. And this is the constant feature throughout Shaul's life and his kingship, is this inability to step up to the role. And this here of sparing Agag is a demonstration that actually he needs to have that reassurance from the people. He needs to show and demonstrate to the people, but more to himself, that he's a Ganzer Knacker, by making himself a monument and by sparing Agag. Now, the people were not interested in Agag. As Michael said, there was absolutely no reason why they should spare Agag. They were interested in the money. They were interested in the animals and the spoil and the booty. Now, when you do a war for the sake of heaven, when you are doing a mitzvah, a milchemet mitzvah, a war of a mitzvah, as opposed to a milchemet reshut, which is a war just to expand your borders. When you are doing God's work, as it were, then it has to be completely and utterly for the sake of heaven. Because otherwise it becomes cruel. It becomes murder. Now, we have a number of examples in Tanakh where we see wars where the people were not allowed to take the spoil. This is one of them. They were told, do not take any of the spoil. All of the animals, everything, get rid of it. And they didn't do it. Where else in Tanakh do you know where there were wars where they were not allowed to take the spoil? Anita, you're muted.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't it when they went into Jericho, they were told?
Correct. Correct. The first one was Jericho. Jericho, they were told, do not take any of the spoil. And what happened?
One guy took spoils, and therefore they were defeated.
That's right. The spoil was kept by one particular person. They did a lottery. They found out who it was, and he was punished, and his family were punished. But they didn't do what they were told, and as a result of that, they suffered a reversal in the next battle at Ai. Tell me another example of a war where they did not take the spoils. Guarantee you 1,000,000% you all know this. You've all read it many, many, many times. You might have been bored by the time you got to this bit because it's towards the end, but you've definitely read it. Any offers? Jeffrey?
Could it be classed as going back to modern times or going forward to modern times, that in the 6-Day War, we wanted to give back what we'd conquered for peace?
Ooh. Okay, well, possibly, but I'm not sure that we gave it back l'shem shamayim. I think we gave it back to avoid political fallout, and we didn't really give it back either. We only just gave it them to look after. I'm thinking about something in Tanakh. Anyone? David?
Must be to do with Egypt. Is it to do with Egypt?
No.
No.
The war against Bnei Haman.
Yes, Esther, Megillat Esther, chapter 9. There it is on the screen for you. Verse 10, Leon, please. Chapter 9, verse 10.
The 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Jews' enemy, but they did not lay their hand on the spoils.
Okay, that's verse 10. The sons of Haman, they killed them, but they didn't take their spoils. Have a look at verse 15 in the same chapter.
The Jews that were in Shushan assembled again on the 14th day of the month of Adar and slew 300 men in Shushan, but they did not lay their hand on the spoils.
And verse 16, please.
The rest of the Jews that were in the king's provinces assembled and defended themselves, gaining relief from their foes, slaying 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay their hand on the spoils.
Okay, am I right that you've all heard that before in Megillat Esther? Yes. Okay, so there you are. Megillat Esther, Yericho. There is precedent here. When you do something for the L'Shem Mitzvah, you have to do it L'Shem Mitzvah. You do it for the sake of the Mitzvah, not for personal gain. And this was the story in Yericho. They didn't follow it in Yericho, and they were punished. And here in chapter 15 of our Shmuel Aleph, they did not do it, and they were punished. This Shaul was punished. He had pity on Agag because he was doing it not to fulfill the mitzvah. To fulfill the mitzvah was a Torah mitzvah to get rid of everyone. Shmuel had told him explicitly to do so, and he didn't do it. And let's just finish off by just seeing the reaction of what happened after this. Verse 10, Leon.
The word of Hashem then came to Samuel, saying, I have reconsidered my having made Saul king, for he has turned away from me and has not fulfilled my word. Samuel was aggrieved by this, and he cried out to Hashem the entire night.
Okay, let's stop there, because I'm confused by verse 11. Is anybody else confused by verse 11? I regret that I've made Saul king, for he's turned back from following me, and he has not fulfilled my words. And it distressed Samuel, and he cried out to the Lord all night. There are two parts to that pasuk, and both of them bother me. I will leave you with a cliffhanger of what is bothering me, and we'll talk about that next time. But before I tell you what's bothering me, does anything bother anyone else about that pasuk?
Why did he appoint Saul in the first place?
Okay, that's the first thing. What's excuse me? What's this concept of HaKadosh Baruch Hu regretting something? How can the all-powerful, almighty regret what he did? That doesn't really make any sense to me. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all-knowing, which he is, then he will have known that Shaul was going to muck up. Why did he do it in the first place? Why? What's this concept of regret? That's the first part that bothers me. We'll go into the answers and discussion about it next time. What's the second thing that bothers me? Jeffrey, what bothers you?
I was going to say it was against God's better judgment, or because he didn't really want the children of Israel to have a king. And that wasn't his intention. It was the children of Israel that wanted the king.
Right. Okay. So maybe that is part of the answer to that question, and we'll explore that in some detail next time. But on that same point, I'm bothered by the second part of the pasuk. Vayichar lishmuel vayizak el Hashem kol halayla. Vayichar. What does vayichar mean? Well, how have you translated vayichar, Leon, please? Verse 11.
I have reconsidered my
later on, and Shmuel, yes. And we've got here, and it distressed Shmuel. What have you got?
Samuel was aggrieved by
aggrieved. This. Okay, well, we know the normal translation of Vayichar. We have it many times in Tanakh. Vayichar af. What does that mean?
He's angry.
Angry. That's right. Vayichar lishmuel.
Shema says v'chara.
V'chara af. Nachon. Correct. V'chara af. Yes. It means angry.
The Koran translates it very nicely, Johnny. Shmuel was enraged.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I like that translation because it's more accurate. Vayichal Shmuel means Shmuel was angry. Vayizak el Hashem kol halayla, and he cried out to Hashem all the night. Vayizak is not just a crying out. Vayizak is a verb which means a great and bitter cry. Where we had that before, Vayizak za'aka gedola umara. Also in the Megillah, they cried out a great cry at the decree of Haman. So what's going on here? God says, I'm sorry I started with Shaul in the first place. And Shmuel is angry. And he's angry and he cries out bitterly to Hashem. So my questions, and we'll leave it here, we'll talk about it next time, is one, what's all this business of Hashem regretting? How can that be right? And secondly, who's Shmuel angry with? Is Shmuel angry with God because he's changed his mind? That's how it seems to read. And what's he crying out to Hashem for? If he's angry with Hashem, why is he crying out to Hashem for help? Doesn't really, this whole pasuk doesn't make a lot of sense to me at first glance, and it needs some explanation. So that is where we will leave it now, and we'll do that next week. Just a quick recap, so we know where we're up to for next time. We spoke in great detail today about this verb vayachamol, which is translated as pity. I showed you chapter 12 of Shmuel Bet, the story, the aftermath of the story of David and Batsheva, where the verb means to have self-interest and to keep for himself. And this is the meaning of the verb here. We demonstrated that both Shaul and the people had self-interest. Shaul particularly is lacking in self-esteem and needed to keep Agag alive for his own aggrandizement. That's why he made the monument in verse 12, and the reaction I showed you in the behavior of Shaul later on in the city of Nov, which uses exactly the same language as verse 3 here, that he was not averse to killing people, children, animals when it suited him in Nov, and over here, when it didn't suit him, he didn't do the job properly. And so we have debunked the myth that somebody spoke about right at the end of last times, which was that Shaul was this humanist who had pity on Agag. The only person he had pity on was himself. Yes, Jeffrey.
I also think, and I'm not sure where it's written, but we're not allowed to gloat over our successes, over our gains. We're not allowed to gloat. We have to show humility.
Correct. And we know, where do we know that from? We know that from the Seder night, don't we? When we take a little drop of wine out of the cup of wine when we do the plagues, and also the fact that for the last 6 days of Pesach, we don't say the full Hallel. And that is for exactly the same reason, because these are also the creatures of God. They are also B'Tselem Elokim. And so you're absolutely right, Jeffrey. That is something which is a Jewish concept. We do not gloat over the destruction of our enemies. And by keeping Agag alive in order to humiliate him, this was Shaul again demonstrating that he was not the right choice as king. You could argue that his successor was also not the right choice as king, since we've mentioned David and Batsheva, but that will have to be for another day. Okay, any other questions or comments regarding today's shiur? Yes, Jeffrey.
I think it just goes to prove that nobody is perfect.
100%. Even Moshe Rabbeinu. Look what happened. We read in yesterday's parsha. I spoke about this in the shiur yesterday afternoon as well, about the faults and the flaws that we see in the characters in Tanakh. And that's one of the things that I find so attractive about Tanakh, is that it's the Oliver Cromwell Judaism, as we've said many, many times, warts and all. We don't seek to, the Tanakh does not seek to cover over the faults of our heroes. Unfortunately, in my humble opinion, unfortunately, Chazal over the generations, and as we have got further and further on, the later commentators all do try and whitewash, Art Scroll being the worst culprit at this. They do try to whitewash any kind of criticism of our heroes in the Tanakh. Tanakh itself does not do that, and I, for one, as you well know, decry the attempt to whitewash everything, because if you are dealing with people who are superhuman, then you can have no relationship to them and you can't learn from their behavior. If you have relationships with people who are human and you see them as human with human failings, then you can learn from both their successes and their failures. So I think Art Scroll and the rest of them do us no favors when they whitewash, and we don't whitewash. Tanakh does not whitewash. It shows you, as Jeffrey says, nobody's perfect. And we have to learn from history, learn from people's mistakes, and try not to do the same things ourselves. Yes, Anita?
Shaul never apologized. He never admitted that he was wrong. And that was whereas David Amalek said chatati and was forgiven.
That's exactly the point. That you just said my whole share from the Tikkun Leil Shavua. It took me an hour and a half to do that, and you just said it in one sentence. Well done. But you're absolutely right. Correct. Okay, it's good to get the band back together again here. We'll see you, those who are joining us, we'll see you on Wednesday. Leon, did you want to add something before we go?
Maybe another time I'll speak to you shortly about it.
All right. Okay, Wednesday as normal, 10:15, whatever normal is, for the Gemara Shia, and we'll see you next week. Don't forget the 12th of July, put it in your diaries. 12th of July, an event in the Shul with Rabbi Shalom Hammer, who's going to be speaking about mental health. Sadly, his daughter committed suicide, and he has made it his life's work to try and bring knowledge of mental health in youngsters to the fore, and where we can spot the signs. I'd like to have a nice audience for Rabbi Hammer, who's coming from Jerusalem, to speak to us on this topic. He's a good speaker. He speaks with emotion, of course, and passion. 12th of July at 8 o'clock in the shul. I've sent a flyer. I'll send it again later on in the week. Those of you who can come, please do so. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Thank you, Johnny.
Oh, Johnny. Thank you.
Welcome back.